Hello friends, I hope you're having a lovely fall. Happy Diwali and blessed Samhain. Today we are going to talk about Jubilee. So first let's go over what that word means and why we use it in this context. Historically, Jubilee was a part of Hebrew tradition. It is one of the tenets of Sabbath law. Part of it is that property is on a 49-year cycle, except for slaves, which are on a 7-year cycle. And at the end of a cycle, this property is liberated and returned to freedom. This is part of the understanding that we as human beings are here temporarily on God's earth. We're borrowing things, they don't belong to us. So this was part of a mechanic for redistribution of wealth and protection of equality. There were other tenets that go along with this, including allowing fields to fallow, which is very important for sustainable agriculture. Of course, we want to be cycling our crops and not depleting the soil resources. Basically, all of these things were part of an acknowledgement that life is cyclical in nature. So, for our purposes, you can think of Jubilee as meaning like a trumpet blast or a shout. It's a call to arms. It's a call for a switch up. This is the fun part. Ooh, I love talking about this. I know I say it every time. Everything is my favorite thing. But this for real, actual this time is my favorite thing. I was just kidding before. This is my favorite thing. So the first step, when in the context of the Conflux, we are having a Jubilee. A Jubilee is a singular unit of combat, which proceeds as follows. First, a battleground is selected, and the combatants. So in any singular Jubilee, only 2 factions are going to be represented at a time. In order to qualify, and this is of course subject to change based on how these numbers actually function and play out, there's going to be some experimentation, but theoretically we will need to have a standing general and at least 9 soldiers. And there are going to be many more than that as long as each team has an equal amount, of course. There's an additional stipulation that factions may enlist the help of a cusp faction. So this is how the cusps may be involved in the LARP portion. They can enlist either the one above or below them in zodiacal order, unless the 2 dueling factions are ones that touch. For example, this would be like if Aquarius was battling Capricorn, neither side would be entitled to the cusp, which is in the middle of those 2, which is Cygnus, so they would have to go to the ones above and below. And then they may enlist equal number of cusp factions in addition to the regular numbers to add more complexity and intricacy to the battle, and we'll have to see how all these numbers play out down the line. In order to qualify as a combatant, of course, each player needs to have a uniform, which is combatant appropriate, right? Gradient and order. Armor appropriated for their represented armor class, which is laid out in their character sheet and meditations that they've thought about. I won't go into the full details of that here. We'll talk about that at greater length later. They must have a LARP standard, safe, official foam weapon, which will be inspected prior to battle. They must have protective eyewear. I've started researching this. I haven't come up with a final conclusion, but I'm a big fan of eye safety, so I think we're going to have some standard issue eyewear that is just how we roll, regardless of whether it's, Sagittarius is fighting and there's projectiles involved. I kind of think we should just have it. They should have worked out a basic kind of tone and temperament of their character, what types of sayings or shouts or commands their character would use, and general theatrics that go with the playing of that role. Oh, everybody, I ideally will be subjected also to a physical evaluation. I've been to, the doctor somewhat recently, what have you, and just have documented and reported any long-standing physical conditions that might be exacerbated by rigorous activity, just to keep everything on the up and up. So the battleground selection will likely be something like a public park, an open setting, preferably with some amenities like pavilions or cooking pits, bathrooms, the basics. There's lots available. It'll take some trial and error to see what type of venues are actually going to be open to this type of activity. I'm sure there will be concern due to the nature of the activity at first until we've done a few. I've rented venues like this in the past for other types of activities, and I find it just takes a lot of communication, but a lot of things are possible if you're very clear and conduct yourself professionally. So actual acquisition, of course, of the venue will be budgeted and handled by the Conflux in a general sense. And then the factions participating will have individual responsibilities that I'll go into detail here. So out of the two, it'll be a coin flip or whatever, selected at randomly. One of them is going to be responsible for providing a banquet, and the other faction is responsible for providing the entertainment. Each of the factions on this venue will be responsible for setting up sort of a camp, whether that's tents, gazebo. This is really up to individual preference and how crazy you want to get. I would like to see it get pretty insane. But basically you want to create an encampment that is thematic, that is inviting. You want to create a space for people to come in and have conversations and engage with your characters and set a mood. So each of the two factions will be creating on opposite ends of the field their camp. You might want to have banners, factional markings, make it as distinctive as possible. Create the type of conversation environment that you think will be conducive to winning people over to your cause, right? That's the whole point. Now, in my mind, I've worked this out a couple of different ways. I think the way that would work out the best is to do all of this before the battle at all, but it's possible that it might be better to do the performance beforehand and then have the battle and then eat afterwards. Well, again, we'll have to kind of go through and see what works out best, and maybe for certain ones it works better one way or another. I don't know. I guess we'll see. But in my mind, what will happen is the faction that's responsible for putting on the banquet will have everybody come and sit and get settled and feed everybody. And as they're sat down to do that, and that's both contestants and guests, and hopefully lots and lots of random bystanders or people that were invited, general spectators, to come and experience this activity in a communal fashion. Also because more spectators means more opportunity for earnings, right? That's kind of the whole point of putting on the spectacle. The feast itself, I should interject, it's very imperative to me, from my experience with events like this, that the faction kind of go as all out and as hard as they can to research the cuisine of the culture that is resonating with their faction. We went over that in the previous video. When I was in school, we had an event that was very much part of the inspiration for this whole procedure, which was called Multiculti, and it was a lovely little time. We did this before we let out for Thanksgiving break. Each of our homerooms, which we call forums, were responsible for choosing a culture, or sometimes we got away with choosing really outlandish stuff that wasn't even a culture that was notable, right? Usually it would be something like, oh, this is Indian, this is Chinese, this is Italian, or whatever. Sometimes, in the spirit of creativity, we could come up with things like Atlantis, or when we'd one did the Upper Peninsula. That was particularly hilarious. We did the Indo-Europeans. That one turned out pretty good. Sometimes it's like literary was like Willy Wonka or something, and all of the food and all of the decor and everything was geared toward that. And the idea was that everybody would go around to all of the different homerooms and get to experience the decorations and the the food and all of that, and learn something about different cultures. Each homeroom would pair up with another one, and they would have to make a formal, we tried, right, presentation that was actually educational about some notable things about the culture, and this was all just a very elaborate excuse to spend the entire day eating and hanging out and then go on break, right? So that was multiculti, and it was one of my favorite things, I think, in the whole of school. It was actually quite educational. There were earlier ones too that would be like a separate event. Sometimes they would have in the gym or whatever. In like primary school, we would have different culture days. So maybe you have similar things where you're from. But I think those are really important, and I want to recreate the spirit of that, because I think in a lot of areas there just isn't really access to that. Like if you're not already involved with a cultural org, or maybe if it is open to the public, it's not exactly something someone will feel comfortable just showing up to. So maybe this will be off the wall enough, that people will just come up, show up and accidentally learn something. I don't know, that's kind of the hope that I have. So each faction should be researching recipes kind of all the time, and kind of developing things that are signature to that faction, that are both derived from the culture they resonate with, and, time that they've spent cooking with each other. I'm a big cook myself. I love to do. I don't know if I'm any good, but I very much enjoy it, and I think that it's an important part of life to be able to do that. So that's going to be a very important component, right? The eating. So while everyone is feasting, the other faction that was responsible for putting on a spectacle will perform, and that can be kind of in the same token. Research should be kind of being put forth to learn about either culturally significant types of performance that are relevant to the faction, or things that are maybe more relevant, like weapon-wise, was kind of my line of thinking, as far as utilization of props and things like that. So for Scorpio, maybe it would be something involving whip tricks, so that could be pretty cool. Or maybe for Cancer, right, traditionally has kind of a glaive weapon, maybe something involving hooping. So some derivative possibly might lend itself well to the performance. It can be music. Certain venues do have limitations on, only acoustic music is allowed, things like that. So you check with the venue and what's appropriate and what's workable. But throughout the year, I'm hoping that all factions are sort of developing these the little gifts, these little presentations and performance, and they'll all be documented and, videoed all nice. So everybody is able to eat and chill and get acclimated and introduced a little bit and have a nice show. Once everybody is good and warmed up, the next phase is kind of the most important. It's all important, but this is kind of the meat of it that we're trying to kind of slip in there. In addition to preparing those two divvied responsibilities, each faction is also going to be responsible for presenting some sort of project that they're working on. And of course, at all times, all factions are going to have varied levels of projects that they've got going on. They're going to have different groups and committees looking at either the victory condition on a macro level and things that contribute directly to that, or maybe they've got more localized issues that smaller interest groups are looking into. But each faction will be presenting something that they put together. Maybe it's got a poster board, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. Whatever they think is effective for conveying a particular cause that they are looking for the proceeds to benefit, right? That's kind of the point. And at that point, the spectators will be able to listen and consider what they're working on. One, to just get informed about it and see cool things that are going on in the community. Maybe it's something that the faction needs additional volunteers for, and it's a good recruitment opportunity, or maybe it's just straight up, you need some money. So onlookers, the spectators, will then have the opportunity to donate directly to either of the two combatants, depending on, whether the cause resonated with them. Maybe it was a local thing that's near and dear, so they just wanted to straight up give money directly to them. Or if they're just having a lovely time and they want to see more Jubilees happen in that area, of course they are welcome to donate to the Conflux directly for the purpose of booking venues, logistics, banners, signage, whatever it's going to take, the usual kind of nitty-gritty things. Or, most common, I expect will be the most common, because it's more fun. It's a little bit gambly, but it's not, loot boxy. I think there's nothing wrong with that type of ante where they donate directly to the pot, right? The jackpot amount that will be awarded to the overall winner of the contest, the match. So after that's all set up, preparations begin to head to the battlefield, right? Each combatant is going to be meeting with the referee in secret, and they will be assigned one of 6 kill zones. Each person randomly, RNG, every match is completely different. Only they and the referee know what their kill zone actually is. Now, this came from research I went to Germany this year, and we don't have a whole lot of LARP already going on in America. It's quite rare, and it's not very big. So I went to the biggest one in the world, which is Conquest in Germany, to see how they do it, and they run quite a show there. It's really something. And I took a lot of mental notes comparing all the research that I'd done leading up to that, on how I thought the Jubilee should go, and seeing what's effective and what maybe could be done differently based on how it runs at Conquest. So I already had the concept of kill zones kind of in my head, and I think it kind of confirmed from watching the combat there, which is very intense, but it's sort of impersonal in some situations. So I think this maybe is a good solution. But so instead of hit points, you have kill zones, where it's kind of, think of it as like an Achilles heel. It's just the area that you are have a weakness in, that you can actually suffer fatality from in game. So it's possible that someone you're fighting can be wailing on a different zone that is not your kill zone, and they can just be going at it, and it just won't affect you, right? You will act in turn, and show discomfort, obviously, from taking wounds, but it doesn't put you out of commission. So to actually get knocked out or taken out, you have to suffer the appropriate number of hits to that kill zone based on your armor class. And of course, light is you can only take 1 hit in your kill zone, medium is 2, and heavy is you can take up to 3 hits. But that's if you have a piece exactly in that kill zone. So, you can... It's very unlikely that in this type of fighting you would just want to have heavy armor everywhere. Like, nobody's going to be walking out just a completely... It's not comfortable, and that's just not kind of the type of LARP it is, right? You want to be much more mobile, much more theatrical, and there's really no advantage to staying in the fight necessarily, and that's going to sound a little bit weird maybe to traditional LARPers. The goal is not really to get kills. The goal is not necessarily to, stay in the fight forever. It's more like, how can you get the most leverage out of your acting possible, from the flashiness and the theatrics of your outfit. If that is your armor class and, like, you want to do that, like, fine, maybe pick a couple kill zones. Like, you'll know with your design kind of which way to take it. And also, it's very deceptive if you have armor in any area, because the enemy doesn't know. They don't know what your kill zone is. It's completely random. So they could guess, that the armored region is where you got lucky and rolled it, and, be wailing on it for a while, only to realize, like, it's not having an effect. So that's kind of the fun of the randomness, and it changing every time, and so You know, you're you're kind of taking a gamble with your character about where you want to put your points in that way, rather than just having an elaborate sheet with lots of stats. You know, I don't find that. I've seen that in other more American LARP stuff, but with like the tennis balls and yeah, we're not doing all that. I don't find that to be fun or engaging. And you must keep in mind that you are performing for the onlookers. You are trying to win them over. You're not necessarily trying to win the fight overall, because that's going to come down to a little bit of mechanic, overall fitness, overall like agility. It's a much more agility based game than like a brute strength game, because you're not looking to wound anyone, right? You're not knocking them out. This isn't football. You're maneuvering, right? Very theatrically, flamboyantly. And a lot of it comes down to maintaining distance and being kind of provocative, inflammatory, making big elaborate threats and speeches and general fuss, that's kind of more the point. So that is how the battle plays out. The general is responsible for organizing tactics, and experimenting with different formations and things like that, and seeing from game to game what proves to be effective. That's the general is overseeing kind of the whole shape of the battle, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. Is it possible that we'll have fights so big in the future that there will be multiple generals on the field? Possibly. There's a lot of additional mechanics that have been thought of and kind of built in so far that account for much greater numbers, but for the time being, we need to focus on just getting the basic, teams, so that there's multiple pairings that are even possible within a given region. We'd like to get as many factions up and running as quickly as possible to be able to compete against one another and start generating revenue in that way. In the back of your mind, always be cognizant that there are several avenues of income, basically. There are lots of different ways to contribute, lots of different ways to generate that revenue and provide resources for the things that the faction is working on. And they're designed to allow for everybody of every ability level, of every interest, of every talent, of everybody's contributions are going to be tallied as equally as possible. That is the goal. That's why we've strived to build in so many different ways. So even if you're not as physically inclined, or you have mobility issues or whatever the case may be, it's not necessarily to participate in the LARP to benefit and contribute your faction. This is just one avenue. But for the people who are into that, we want to make it as good as possible. And for the people that are more artistically driven, that are maybe musically inclined, and want to do design or whatever that inclination may be, they can find an outlet on the website. And then there will also be the online portion of the role play, which is we haven't talked about yet. Oh no, we'll talk about that later. But that's a whole thing in of itself as well, and that can either be in place of, in addition to. Any individual also has the choice to explore all of these different ways, depending on how much time they want to put in. And I'm not here to dictate. It's whatever degree you want to be involved. It's whatever you find enjoyable, obviously within reason, so it's not detracting from any responsibilities in your personal life. But theoretically, there should be kind of an outlet that could take the place of things that you are currently doing, which maybe aren't feeding your soul the best, right? We would like for the LARP to maybe take place of other sporting activities, or maybe other physically oriented local activities that are, how do I say, kind of more cliquey, or kind of more like membership based, or kind of more exclusive, or kind of more draining, or whatever maybe is not optimal about your other physical outlets, right? For me, it's dancing. I like to go to the club, but I'd have to say, currently, My club is about the least gratifying experience possible, both on the actual getting a good workout in and also social outlet. Yeah, it's pretty suboptimal. So if you have a similarly suboptimal physical outlet that you're contributing a lot of time into, or maybe you've built up a lot and you don't really know why or have justification for it, maybe this will be a good alternative, huh? Yeah. Also, you know, the ORPG is supposed to take the place of comparable MMOs or whatever, you know, black holes of time suckage you've got going on. I have my share of those as well. And I've always kind of wanted a game that was more cumulative, that was more purposeful, that was more intelligent, that was more emergent, is kind of the word that I'm focusing on with the ORPG. You know, that's player driven, that's not just an experience that's handed to you, that you have some control over, but also there's a lot of structure provided. So it's a careful balance, of course, with game design. I'm not saying this is going to be the next WoW by any stretch. It's probably not. It's going to be pretty bad at first, but I have a lot of really, I hope, interesting ideas for creating a valuable experience. We'll see. So this is part of that. This is, you will have the choice, and they will interact together in the future. I am very much hopeful that outcomes from the online community will possibly impact the matchups that are made, you know, which teams are selected to fight in Jubilee. There may actually be backstory that starts to be developed for why those two factions have a problem with each other right now, and they're actually working something out, and maybe that theatrically will be built into the interactions the generals are having. I don't know. That would be pretty cool. And all this, you know, will be chronicled and cataloged and videotaped and documented and made available for lots of rewatching and, you know, artistic pleasure in that way. I'm very excited about it. I love LARPing. I don't know. It was an extremely positive experience going this year. It does something that other things just don't do, and I've done the pen and paper, you know, I've done the D&D, I've done lots of different games, but there's something very special about being there in person, and overall Germany is just much farther ahead in all of those respects. There's pretty much something to do every single weekend if you want to really be into it. There's different genres and themes, and I've heard tales of this really cool thing called Tavern, which is, you know, usually takes place evidently at a castle because they just have them laying around, right, one each. And so you go to the castle like you do on the weekend, and you go and drink with people and dress up and LARP, and that just sounds awesome. I don't know, pretty jealous. But ideally, like that's a culture that's been created, right? That's something that people have chosen and cultivated, and enough people are interested in, and there's enough money circulating that's just become a thing. It could just as easily be the case anywhere else, even here, with enough sustained interest. And one criticism that I would have of LARP so far in Germany is kind of that, I mean, I guess conceptually you could criticize LARP in general for being kind of like escapism. I found that it wasn't so much escapism, it was almost sort of the opposite psychologically. Just looking at using it to run away from problems, I found that people were kind of using it to run toward problems, which is really something that I didn't expect. I didn't have a ton of expectations going into it, but that did really shock me. It was almost like therapeutic. It was extremely cathartic, just by nature of, you know, you're running around role-playing and beating on people with sticks. Of course, it's a good time. But also, there were so many aspects that were extremely realistic, and I don't think they were necessarily trying to be. Like, there were a lot of pagans there, of course, but there were tons and tons who weren't, just straight up, just wasn't of interest, you know, no big deal. But people who were planning, coordinating some of the ritualistic elements, or, you know, things that were supposed to be kind of tribal. My tribe is Earth people. Big shock for me, right? I know, way out of character. Real hard to play. So out of my element. But, you know, the rituals and some of the activities and the story elements, I was really shocked how real they were to how ritual order would actually go in either, a Wiccan or Druidic or other style of pagan ritual. Like, there were some things that were just like, wow, you did that better than, like, public rituals I've been to. Like, you really kind of, if you were guessing, it was a really good guess. And they were, for the most part, just like, yeah, that just seemed like the way you would do it. It's like, no, legit, people have been kind of doing it that way for, thousands of years possibly, but, like, to know that kind of intuitively rather than have it be from a place of hardcore research and recreation, compared to, like, historical reenactment versus LARP, it was really shocking to me because, having studied in ADF and really studying the Druidic stuff very, I thought, scholarly, I was still impressed. How even without that depth of research, I completed a year-long study program just about, Indo-European paganism, and there were things that's just like, wow, how did you... I had to read the driest book that's ever existed on the planet. It was terrible. Read it, but don't read it. In Search of the Indo-Europeans, don't. It's lovely. It's very dry. It is desert sand dry of a book, but lots of really, really great, fascinating technical things. It's just like, if you're not like a super nerd about it, I can see how that angle might be a bit of a turnoff for some people, but to get that level of engagement and accuracy without even going that far, it was just like, wow, why is everybody else trying so hard? Was kind of my takeaway. I was impressed. All in all, very lovely time, very lovely people, very profound, meaningful, therapeutic group ritual experiences. I'll recount one just because it was kind of heavy to me. I had a hard time with it, being one of the sole English speakers, and I can speak a little bit of German, but keeping up was very difficult when it came to very elaborate, LARP story stuff. Sometimes it was hard to tell, is this a German word or is this a LARP word that's like just in this fantasy world that I just don't understand, or they're pronouncing it as a LARP word with a German accent, and it's a lot to know. So there was one ritual that there were, I don't know, 50 people or so, something. It was quite a large group, and it was at night. And it was at the shrine that we, the Earth people, were protecting, which was the shrine of kind of like death and rebirth. The word's a little weird, but basically it's like the transience of life and accepting death as a natural part of the process. And that in and of itself is a very beautiful pagan sentiment that's just part of the built-in lore. Nobody really thinks of it as anything super religious. But we were doing this, going around the circle, we were asked to recount someone who had passed away recently. And it was just really hard because, like, I did want to be part of that release and that communal experience, and like I found it surprisingly relevant because I had recently lost someone, and it's like I didn't have like the confidence at that time, and I was like already almost in tears, right? I just didn't have it in me to just start spouting off in English when everything else was in German. So hopefully by next year I'm going to be completely fluent and this will go a little bit better. But it's just like hearing each one, and like it was so moving and so real, and like the part where the person starts and the characters start, and it's like it's very thin, it's very malleable, and you really have a lot of choice about where your boundaries are, what you want to touch on, what you don't. So I think there's a lot of use of kind of the same concept in psychotherapy, where, by using a proxy or a third party or a puppet or something like that, kind of like having a step of removal from what you think of as your ego or your current self. Maybe even hypnosis does this, I don't know, I haven't done it. Like having that one step of removal really empowers you to get in there and deal with some really heavy stuff that maybe if you were just consciously talking about it, you wouldn't. So I saw a lot of that. I saw just a lot being dealt with. So to go back to the original point I was trying to make before I got off on a tear here, I find that instead of being an avenue for escapism, LARP is very much the opposite. It's an avenue for very deep introspection. Yeah. So that's not necessarily the purpose or the outcome desired of Jubilee itself, but I wouldn't really be surprised if a lot of that kind of starts becoming a thing, becoming a mechanism that's happening through doing that type of role play, being able to hash out problems. So I hope it will become a very valuable experience just for the individual to participate in and to have that sort of group experience. Anytime you have a potluck or a community thing, it's just always good. It's always a good experience. It gives you this opportunity for collective transcendence, for learning about each other and becoming more tolerant and becoming more empathetic. You know, so there's a lot of positives. A lot of benefits just to the participation, and I'm hoping that it will also be a pretty effective method for the fundraising. I think any time that you're able to plead your case in person and look people in the eye and tell them what you're about and speak from the heart, it's much more effective than just throwing up a GoFundMe, you know, or having one of those donate your birthday things. Those are fine, but I think in this day and age we're really missing the purpose and the intimacy and the local relevance to some of these initiatives, and that's really what the whole of the Conflux is about, is these incremental improvements, these individual causes adding up over time, looking forward to this overarching victory condition, looking forward to these 12 divided responsibilities that put all together are going to ensure a high quality of life for everyone on Earth. And every little piece adds up and becomes a part of that. So I hope very much that you start to maybe be inspired by hearing me talk about this. Isn't very organized. I had a scripty kind of, it didn't happen. I just kind of wanted to talk to you today. This is fun, right? This off-script stuff. I hope it inspired you maybe in some little tangenty way to start to think about your own involvement, like what part you might be personally interested in. If anything resonated with you as far as like where you see yourself making that contribution or being able to be heard or validated. I love to hear about it just at this early stage, suggestions. That the overall skeleton of it is pretty set, but like I said, we're going to have to hash out exactly what the order is. But in conclusion, very important, can't skip over this part. As with all things, but especially because this is going to be one of our main in-person interactable things, sustainability and caretaking of the environment is prime concern number one. So after all is said and done, after the match is set, the winner has been determined, and lots of fuss has been made. It is important that everybody, of course, contributes and helps with the breaking down and making sure everything is properly disposed of. It will be the job of both factions, all hosting parties, to ensure that proper receptacles, if they are not already provided by the venue, if additional ones are needed, proper recycling receptacles and all of that, and that every care possible is taken to make it as sustainable as possible where it can be. In what the festival community, it's like Moop or whatever, don't be leaving trash around, and take care of the venues, of course, so that we'll be invited back and leave a good impression. But besides that, also, that's kind of our directives. We should do it just because it's what we do. Okay. I think that pretty much covers the topic as I've thought it out so far. This is just the individual unit. It might be that in the future there's something that's more compounded. Maybe we would have some greater competition where several of these are kind of in a row, or there's like a championship or something like that. I have no idea. I don't know where it might go in the future. But the main thing I think right now is just getting it so that they're, at first, a couple of these a year, and then eventually like maybe one a month, kind of growing to that point. is overall the goal. So there's something to kind of be planning and look forward to, and kind of keep every faction on the docket having something to do. In the meantime, of course, there's all the online things to contribute to, but things tend to go better with more planning time and more heads up and more notice. Helps to get the best numbers possible, most participation, and keep everything nice and easy and stress-free and prepared for. I find with event hosting, notice is good. So, thank you so much for hanging with me. I know this was lengthy and meandering, but it's a good first introduction to the concept of Jubilee and what it means and what it's going to do. And I hope you're already a little bit interested, maybe fired up, maybe even all about it. I don't know. I'm pretty all about it. This is one of my favorite parts. So, I hope you have a good rest of the day,